Hello, everyone watching. Welcome back to Citizen Bear. This is a podcast relating to the topics in my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, and how they relate to our society today. And while the book is fictional and we're having a great discussion, a lot of these topics are very relevant to our modern world and a lot of the discourse that we have going on, not just in this nation, but around the world. And I think it's important to look at them and talk about it and consider them from a very real perspective and a thoughtful one where people can reflect and take on their own points. And certainly if you choose to read the book, that's something where in the course of the fictional story that goes in, it's a good yarn if you want to read it on that level, but certainly it's also many layers to it, and I think that you can kind of read it in depth and take a pause to think about our world, our society, and your life, and many of the choices that have been laid at our feet. Last time I talked about the militia and how it was really a very important topic to the book and to our society. And we covered a small amount of ground there, and we kind of laid the foundation and introduced it. And today I really want to expand on that a little further, and then we'll put it to bed and move on to other topics. But I'd really like to take some time and go a little further with this concept of the militia. Last time I talked about Frederick Douglass's famous concept or statement that people's rights, I should say, are founded in three primary boxes: the jury box, the ballot box, and the ammo box. Many people have added to that the soapbox with the freedom of speech, and I think some people might even consider the coin box, not just because the coin box is a tool for holding back funds or not supporting a product or a cause or whatever, but also because we can be generous and we can do good with the coin box. We can tithe the church. We can give to our neighbor and do good things. And today I want to expand on some of those ideas and particularly we talked a lot about the jury box and the ballot box a little bit, but I want to expand on the concept of the ammo box and how the Second Amendment plays in with that and is a very important part of our society and this concept of the body of the American people and a militia, being a militia. I think one of the greatest expressions of a free society is in its people's willingness to defend it. And when, again, we can look at that in not just in the jury box, not just in the ballot box. Those are great ways that we can defend it. With the soapbox, absolutely. But ultimately, these things don't have teeth unless they are supported by the cartridge box. And that is the ammo box. And that is a very, very important concept, one that can sometimes be a little distasteful out there, but would preferably be unnecessary. But in our world, it has always proven to be an important aspect against any attack, or foreign and domestic, on our rights. And the body of that American people, to have that weight, is an important concept when we look at preserving the jury box, the ballot box, the soap box, and even the coin box. The militia, when we talk about the defense of our society, we first have to cover the fact that there is no doubt that our great military are the defenders of our society, our regular military. Our troops are wonderful. They're amazing young people, and we're so very blessed. And we should also always remember that they are us. I mean, it's not some government agency, right? These are our sons, our daughters, our aunts and uncles, our fathers and mothers, and our brothers and sisters, and they are us, and we support them. And being part of our society, bringing weight to them, is that we participate in whatever endeavors we ask them to do, no matter whether it be logistical or other means. We support them in their endeavors on all manners, lovingly. There also can be no doubt in the world as it is today and the many challenges that are facing our military and how far-stretched they've really become. There also can be no doubt as to the multidimensional role the body of the American people played in support of our national defense, as we briefly discussed in the prior episode. One of the most profound things I heard recently, and it's very, very shocking, is if you ever get a chance, I would recommend that you look it up online and try to listen to it. It can be a little disturbing, actually. It comes from, I believe, the 1960s, early 1960s, when the Cold War was going on. And the Soviet Union was this other force out there, a great nuclear threat. they took on a very serious role, and that always weighed over us. And I grew up in the 60s, 70s. I remember the weight of the Cold War. We got on with our lives, but it was always out there. And the threat of a nuclear holocaust or a nuclear war. I think that, though, what I saw in this piece is it's a mock on what the actual announcements that were prepared to be made, from the playbook of the British government, based on a mock attack on the British island and the British society. And it cuts and moves from the announcer to the prime minister, and it covers a lot of ground. And in this mock thing, they talk about how people should seek shelter. They should get underground. In London and other places, that missiles have been detected and that they are trying to intercept them, and things are happening. They talk about how the prime minister, not to worry, the prime minister and the government have been moved to a safe location. The Queen has been moved to a safe location. And then they talk further about how Russian airborne forces, Soviet forces, have landed in Scotland and are now invading Scotland to the north, and that people that their soldiers are engaging them on the ground. And they bring up a great point. They make a statement in there. It's easy to almost miss. They say, if you are, and I'm paraphrasing, if you are armed or if you wish to fight back, do so now. They're trying to bring the weight of people to bear in a time when people are being forced to hide and do things that if you're ready to stand up to this, if you're willing to be an asymmetric force, then you must fight back now. Ironically, today, when we go forward, the British have all but eliminated guns with gun control in the British Isles. It's very difficult to own a firearm, and it's even more difficult to have a stockpile of any kind of ammunition. I don't know that the British people could fight back even if they wanted to, if there was ever an invader. And with modern economics and other problems and the way the world has changed, the British military isn't that huge anymore. It's really quite small, relatively small. And to take on something like that, if there ever was a confrontation against the British homeland, I don't know that they could respond. And I don't know that the people could rally that force against an invader, even an asymmetric force. That's a terrifying concept. We've seen this go on now all through the Western society, what we often refer to as the free world, and where we've limited control of firearms so terribly. We've virtually taken them away. It has become a complete disarming of society. And I know that there are some who have good intentions with that, but I'm not sure that all of those intentions are so good, because in the same time, we are also seeing many of these governments move towards more authoritarian rule, more control. The liberties that they often bragged about have become something of parchment promises, and are really just illusions at this point, because government is really cracking down. And I use the example of, in Great Britain, a woman was arrested and brought to trial, mind you, for her thoughts. I mean, in my life growing up, if that ever happened in this country, and frankly, if that ever happened, in fairness to the British, there was a time you would have been laughed out of court. I mean, the police would have been reprimanded for that. And it was very acceptable. In Germany, from what I understand now, it is a crime to openly criticize the government online or make statements against the government. I mean, isn't that the point of free society and democracy in a republic, to openly be able to criticize the government? Isn't that the point of free speech? So we really have to take stock in where we have gone. And there are many reasons for this. Some of it is about control. Some of it is about fear. But I think that we must never reach a point of fear where we start to give up our liberties. It is actually doubling down on our liberties that keeps us from that fear. Along the line of our militia, one of the other things that I would want to point out is that, Sun Tzu, in his writings, which is now known as The Art of War, wrote about how really you cannot control or hold a piece of land or a country where the civilian population is in revolt. against you, particularly against an armed revolt. And we have seen this over and over and over again. Sun Tzu wrote that thousands of years ago, and it's still considered, his book, in The Art of War, as writings that are known as The Art of War now, are considered mandatory reading in top military schools around the world. So it's not like this is crazy thinking here. This is something that's out there. One of the ways that our military has tried to get around that and tried to do things that we've seen over so many decades in my lifetime is to go to nation building. And in other words, win the hearts and minds of the people when you're there. We were very successful with this in World War II, but the world has changed, and we're not fighting wars like World War II right now. We're not dominating a country. People haven't had enough. It's not total war. People are, moving on. And frankly, there are different value systems in different countries. The Germans had very close ties to the American people in many ways, relatives and other things like that. So I think people were ready in Germany when the war was over, ready to get on with it, and they wanted a more free society again. I think they were fearful of the Soviet push in and control, and I know many preferred to make it to Allied lines, and it wasn't that we were on a nation-building plan at that point, or winning hearts and minds. It's they naturally won hearts and minds because they did good deeds, they did good things, they took care of people. And they looked to a better tomorrow for them. And I think that was a huge factor in what we did in World War II. And there are scores of examples of that. The great our GIs and others who did great things. But I also think that when we do this nation building, we've watched this over time around the world, and it's wretchedly failed. I mean, we have to come to the conclusion that the nation building concept and winning hearts and minds with our military, particularly in places where they have their own ideas about how they want to live, their religion, everything else, it really hasn't been a stunning success. And we've been proven time and again that people who are in rebellion against us usually end up eventually driving us out, or other countries. And it's been a proven doctrine over and over and over again, and yet we don't seem to quite want to learn it, and we seem to want to almost disavow it here at home for our own benefit and protection, which is a little frightening. I think it's a large conversation to have, and I know that there's a lot of different things, but I'm trying to make a point food for thought. But the end and be all of trying to nation build and make it in a zero-sum game is just not probable when you make a construct of all of the factors in that zero-sum game to remain equal. We tend to ignore the social values of other countries, and we tend to impose our own as we do that nation building. And sometimes I think that's at the heart of that failure. But again, that's a much larger discussion as we look at how we do things in the world, and it's not really totally germane to our own defense. But I would say in that is we're no different. I don't think the American people are going to sit back and be very happy with anyone who wants to start imposing their will over their day-to-day lives. The American people, utilizing the individual right to keep and bear arms, still constitute the single greatest unorganized asymmetric force in the history of the world. While big government fears such an ideal, it is not afraid to use it in its own defense. We saw this in Ukraine and many other countries where when invaded, it suddenly became a good idea to give the population semi and fully automatic weapons. I mean, honestly, when the invaders are driving towards your capital in tanks, it's a bad time for people to be picking up AKs and start figuring out how they work and trying to shoot. In many ways, look, it worked out. The Russians were their own worst enemy in that confrontation is one example. And there were many brave people who helped drive them back and alter the course of that invasion. But I will say, again, it is a bad time to start becoming proficient with a weapon when the enemy is at your gates. The time for that is over a lifetime of building it. I've been handling firearms for 50 years, maybe a little more than 50 years. And I've certainly still learning about that. And there's always more you can learn. And there are people who still teach me things, especially historical things. But learning those basics and learning gun safety, learning how not to sweep people with them and keep muzzle control and trigger control and how to handle a firearm is a very, very important skill, and it's also one that is perishable. You need to keep it up, and you need to practice once in a while, and you need to be familiar with what you have. You know, I would also say, you know, as part of this, you know, I know that there's a lot of controversy, and we've had a lot of gun control in this country, and we've been moving towards it over a period of time, since the 1930s, really. And we lost the right to keep fully automatic weapons, and I think that's something of a sad misunderstanding, because I really don't think it's a problem, but that's just me. But we've gone further down the road. I mean, there was a time in this country you could own a fully automatic, you can own a medium weight machine gun. You can just mail away for it, right? Now, I know the world has changed since the 1920s or something. I mean, the famous Tommy gun, you could just buy one. The military rejected it initially before it accepted it in World War II. And it was sold as a ranch gun, you know, for ranchers. I mean, people bought the thing. I mean, I know some criminals made it a bad thing, but it was a small group. And truth of the matter is, no one else in this country really did anything bad. I mean, you know, honestly, you know, we never heard about, you know, people coming out of the Appalachian Mountains with belted machine guns attacking cities. It never happened. It never, ever happened. But that's been restricted. What I would say, though, is that we still have this great right in these people in this country, including me and others, who have firearms and have ability with them and have the ability to function on many levels, sporting levels, right through whatever else we need to do. And we have stores of ammunition. There are from estimates I've heard, 400 million firearms in the hands of somewhere between 70 and 100 million people, with literally trillions of rounds of ammunition. That's a hell of an army. That is a hell of an army when you start thinking about it. You want to come invade the United States. You want to start making trouble in the United States. You want to overthrow our liberties. You are going to face that force. And that is a monstrous thing when you consider, even if half that number, you know, 40, 50 million people fire one shot and kill one enemy soldier, one combatant. I mean, I don't know that's the standing armies of most of the major countries in this world. I mean, that's pretty serious. Now, I know it's not that easy, and I know there's a lot of complexities to it, but that is an asymmetric force to be reckoned with. And we have to be honest. While we have a lot of problems in this country and things that have evolved over the decades, you know, and there are certain things and misuses of firearms, I'm not sure firearms are the problem, and I'm not sure we should wait and take away from our rights as much as it has been a degradation of our society. We have lost our way on a lot of our moral values, and we've moved towards big government, and it has undermined a lot of who we are, and people have become frustrated and desperate, and I think it has brought about a terrible social incline where people resort to violence and the use of a weapon, and we have to work on that. We have to learn to get back to caring for each other and doing a better job in this country. And we need to start caring for our people, because we have been devastated economically and in other realms and socially. And we've been divided into tribes. And I suspect a lot of that, very honestly, it's my personal opinion, a lot of that has to go back to the fact that they seek that big government and others around the world who do not wish for free society to succeed, our country to succeed, want to undermine the great American militia. They want that militia off the table because they don't want to have to face it. You can defeat an army, you can fire nuclear weapons, you can do all kinds of stuff. But when you show up, you really have to try to hold that ground. That's another story, isn't it? And unfortunately, also for those who wish to pervert government and society, I think it's a hard thing when you get in there and start realizing that, you know, these people are going to push back on you. And if you mess with the jury box, you mess with the ballot box, they have options. And they're not nice options, and it's a terrible, terrible thing, but one should give it some pause, you know? Our founding fathers understood this, and they knew it. We are now living in a war of worlds, not just a world war, a time where it is not just waged war is not just waged between nations, but between ideologies within nations. And we've seen this been brought to our shores. Society is fragmented, really kind of frightening. It really is. And I have to tell you, I've never seen, there's always been discourse in America. We've always struggled with the way forward and bettering ourselves, and we get on with it. And it can look to outsiders like mayhem, but we really do quite well getting on with it and finding our way forward. But this is a way of attacking free society, is splintering it, fragmenting it, breaking it into tribes. You know, this is how people who want to obtain or maintain absolute power can keep control, by fragmenting society. And thereby also allowing them to increase the intrusiveness of government, which takes a free society government of the people, for the people, by the people, and turns it more authoritarian. If you don't want to believe that war is possible, this kind of war is possible, we should take a look around us. You know, the war for the ballot box, the war for the jury box has already begun in our society. Now, I think in the last election, the American people rejected that strongly, but it doesn't mean it's gone away. And we've seen some things that I have to tell you in my 61 years I didn't ever think would occur in our country, or it could occur in this country. So we should take pause and take a serious reflection of what is happening and how much the body and the weight of the American people really does matter in how we are going to proceed as a society. It's also, you know, there are a lot of things that happened in the 2020 election. People still raise questions about. I don't feel comfortable with it. And in many cases, the courts turned around and said, look, it was wrong, but there's nothing we can do about it now. And I understand that, but, you know, a lot of it was hid behind COVID and other things, and we can take a lot of the nefariousness out, or whatever you want to say. But there was a lot going on in these times. We also have to look at, like, the use of lawfare in our society. I mean, that is a direct attack on the jury box and how our legal system works. And we've seen things that are absolutely frightening. I never thought I'd see anything like what I've seen over the last few years in the last administration. Unbelievable. If you don't think censorship is out there, I lived it. I mean, I watched what was then Twitter just take my work and the book and drive it into the dirt. I mean, I could not post. Elon Musk bought it. It became X. I advertise. I do things. I get to post. I mean, I'm not really that radical. These are not far-fetched ideas, and I just, was trying to promote my book, and I had the ability to get out there a little more actively after a while, but I was completely shut down, and I'm still shut down on Facebook. So if you think it's not going on, forget it. We've also seen in the global context, wars have broken out everywhere, and we're working very hard. I think a new administration is trying very hard to calm those wars and find a way forward through prosperity and business and new trade and incentives. But it's a hard road, and there's still a lot of differences, and there are still a lot of countries that are on the cusp of war. And China with Taiwan is one of them, and that threat and that assertion, expansion of their influence into the China Sea and in the countries around it, from Vietnam to the Philippines and others, even Japan, is a little frightening. And it happened in World War II, and we see it happening now again with China. And that's something that's a time bomb that's sitting out there. Hopefully we can get that quelled, but it's something that we have to keep in mind. So this concept that there is no threat in our society or in the world is just not true. Let me move along here. In the end, I think that war doesn't have to happen, and I don't want to be a pessimist here. War does not need to occur in our world. And the great American militia can go about being the great society that we are and the free society that we are. And I hope that we can find that way forward. And we are trying to find ways to quell that, and I think that we should be excited about that, and we should hope for peace and sue for it. But we also should be prepared for the worst, and I think that that's something that we stand by and we talk about in the book, because it comes to the main character in the book and all the characters who are great characters, and they really have to face the reality that they were living in denial for so long about what was happening. I want to touch back on the global abolishment of rights on firearms and guns, because I think it's a fact that I've already covered this, with the idea that we do have historical premise in owning firearms and owning even fully automatic weapons. And that's a debate that's going to go on for a long time, and how we should proceed and how we help our society not get into trouble with it is very, very important. Language is also important. We should not be fooled by some of the language that has come out. And one of the things that I've heard is that, the ammo box, the concept of the ammo box, the idea of an armed population, a militia, is a threat to government. Since when do we defend government? Since when is government an entity that we are out there for? We defend the Constitution, and the government is defined within the Constitution, and the parameters of government are defined in the Constitution. We defend our rights, we defend our homes, we defend our families. But I'm not sure that this government that is this separate and distinct entity from the people is something we're defending. I think that's kind of a backward statement. It's a feint, a false flag that we've been given to attack the body of the American people and the right to keep and bear arms. Or, as what Frederick Douglass put, the ammo box. Too many people have come to define, we've come to accept in our modern world that government is this all-knowing large force that will take care of us, and that's just not simply true, and we've seen it time and time again, how government really doesn't have the weight to always handle, especially multiple crises, and people have suffered greatly. We've seen political bias come into play with this, and it's very important for us, and here is a great place where the coin box becomes such an example. We give money to organizations out there that do help on this and augment anything FEMA is trying to do or failing to do. And they do great work. But we can also individually give and help our neighbor and care for ourselves in good ways. And the American people are very generous on that. And I think it's something that we really always want to embrace and remember that is probably one of the most important parts of the concept of the body of the American people, an unorganized militia, that we are capable of doing great things and taking care of our neighbors, not just through taxes, but through caring for each other. The purpose, no one really wants to get into a situation where you're talking about overthrowing a government. I mean, that's kind of a harsh thing, and it's not good for anyone. It's never brought a better result in many ways. But unfortunately, sometimes it becomes almost quintessential in our history and in the world. And I'm not promoting any of that. I'm trying to state against it. But people will provoke it to the point that it becomes almost a foregone conclusion. And that is one of the problems that we must be careful of in our society, is to make sure that we don't provoke an armed rebellion against our own people, against our own government, who has become run amok and is really abusing its people at some point. I think that in doing that, you need to, make sure that we're taking care of each other and doing the right thing. But I don't think the American people ever want to overthrow their government. I think they just want their government back. And I think that's that's the Constitution. And I think that's kind of language that we should be really more focused on. I think people want to live in peace. They want to live happily. Unfortunately, there's just too many threats that are going on in our world and in our society today. I want to move on past some of this, get into the conclusion of this story that I'm trying to take. There's been a lot of speculation in our world, and great thinkers and historians talk about the fall of Rome. And there are many theories, and they range from inflation to money, the valuation of money, and too many wars, too many expansion, and some of that might sound familiar. But I think there's one thing that we can't deny, that probably all of those things came to bear and probably undermined and decayed the Roman society, the Roman Empire. But there is one thing that we can be sure of, that government and the elites of that society had become so separate from the people that there was no longer a cohesiveness. And when the final invasion came, and when Rome really, really fell over several invasions, the elites, the government, could no longer bring the weight of their people, the body of their people, to bear against such a threat. And it became a foregone conclusion. And there was no reason for anyone to fight. If you changed one government for another, it probably didn't matter to many of the people in the streets anymore. That's a frightening and a shocking thing. And we have to make sure that we don't allow those things and those mindsets to happen here. In the book, and I want to read you a section from the book and kind of wrapping this up, there is a part in the story, the militias have formed in kind of a organic manner against an invading force. And that purpose of that force is not to invade the whole country, but to invade major coastal cities, disrupt supply, disrupt the ability to wage war in a global confrontation where war is going on around the world, and not be able to support our forces in that fight around the world. And the main character, a couple of the main characters who lead that militia, get together, and they've been through a lot of struggle, and there's been a lot of upheaval in the story about which direction we're going to go. Are we going to support this militia movement? Are we going to come together as a country? Are we going to go in a different direction? Are we going to give in to this threat? And it leads to a point where the government, one of the generals particularly, start to embrace this and really sees the value. And they lead the militias in what's becomes known as the Battle of the Evacuation Zones. And the purpose of that is twofold. They want to confront this enemy and destroy some of their missile launchers, which threaten air power, but they also want to draw out this enemy force who believes that the militias are a separate organization and in conflict with the government, which they had been for a while. And by doing so, they draw out this enemy from the cities, and they end up using air power then and other forces to actually crush a lot of those forces, which pretty much doesn't end the war, but it destroys a lot of their ability to fight and forces them to retreat into the cities behind cover and hold forth until a final invasion or a final push can be made to toss them out and overwhelm these invading forces and take back these cities. What happens is after that battle, which is a huge success for the militias and a huge success for the regular military, what of the regular military remains in this country, they form into what is called civil defense. They are absorbed up, and we talked about, U.S. Code 10. They become kind of a form of, they're slightly under the National Guard, maybe in a little bit of a kind of a similar thing to the Coast Guard, where in peacetime they are kind of under Homeland Security, but in wartime they're part of the military, and they form into this civil defense force. And we saw something like this also in Ukraine recently. Was after people picked up guns, 4 militias went out and did their thing. They started to form up into civil defense forces that later formed up into regular military. And that's happened in our history before, but this is something, throughout the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, so on and so forth. But in this conflict, they form up into this the militias start to form up into a civil defense force. And it's led by a somewhat elusive and secretive figure who is known as Two Dragons. And as Two Dragons takes control of the force, he sets out several proclamations. And I'd like to read you the one from the book on this. First proclamation, this is from Two Dragons, and the people in it is called A Call to Service. And remember, this is a fictional story we're writing now. In accordance with the National Civil Defense Act, we have begun the process of building a civil defense organization. As required by this legislation, We shall be seeking volunteers, contractors, and full-time, part-time workers to fill the numerous roles required to help obtain complete victory. To this end, representatives will be working throughout the country to build the necessary forces to fulfill our mission. We will provide each location with information and the ability to register for service. Since before the birth of our nation, and from time to time throughout its history, men and women of all walks of life have stood up in defense of their homes, their liberties, and their land. In great moments, long before regular armies could be stood up, when certain roles could not be filled, when liberties were most threatened, the Minuteman, the Militiaman, and the General Volunteer have filled the great void created by unthinkable acts and events. There can be no greater expression of liberty than for a free people to willingly and freely defend it. Those who have attacked us have not attacked the government. They have attacked us, the people, for we are the title holders to our government and to our way of life. Whether it is driving a truck or a forklift, patrolling a shoreline or a facility, or taking arms against our enemy, I ask you now to follow in the footsteps of our forefathers and to stand up and join me, to join those intrepid souls who have already taken up arms. I call on the great American militia to stand up as God intended you to do. Very powerful in my opinion, but, I wrote it, so you can be biased. What I would ask of you, and towards the conclusion of this, is if that time ever came here, and in a world that is so fraught with problems, if that threat ever weighed upon you, if that call ever came, do you have what it takes to answer it? Can you stand up and defend your liberty? Do you care enough about it? Have we let it wash away as comfort and technology has the false idea that government will always provide? Government has nothing we didn't give it. There has to be a thought process in the back of your head. Could you answer that call? I know that many of our great young men and women already have, and thank you, and God bless you, and we love you. They have joined the regular military, and they are out there doing great things for us. But we also have to ask of the body of the American people, are you willing to join and stand behind that great effort? As Ronald Reagan said, there is no place in the world to run to. If we lose liberty here, it will be lost in the world. We are the last stand. We must never forget that. The rest of the world depends on us to defend the idea of free society. Make no question, the weight of the American people, the great American militia, through the ballot box, through the jury box, through the soap box, the coin box, and ultimately through the cartridge box, is the greatest defense of free society. This is why they try to fragment you into smaller and smaller tribes in order to destroy your ability to defend your liberties. But we must never totally relinquish that. We must never give up our rights. We must never give up our ability to defend them. And that lies in the body of the American people. And it lies in the great boxes that Frederick Douglass outlined for us. And that has never changed, and it will never change. No technology, no government, no institution will ever change that fundamental principle. So we're going to move on from this topic, and we're going to go on into a couple other things. So we have some other topics to talk about, and I'm really excited about that. So thanks very much, and we'll get on with the other topics soon.